Hey friends, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my May wrap-up, part 2. So in total, I read 29 books in the month of May, which is a bit crazy. I divided this into 2 parts. The video where I talk about the 16 books I read in the first half of the month, I will link above and below. This wrap-up will be the 13 books that I read in the latter half of the month. And in a very similar fashion, I didn't read anything that was on my May TBR. This was completely a mood reading month, and for some reason, I was in the mood for contemporary books and some romance, which that is like not what I usually read at all. I barely read any historical fiction. I didn't pick up a single graphic novel. It was just kind of a weird month. I don't really know what came over me, but either way, I'm kind of proud of myself because I read a ton of books that are on my shelves, which is great. And even though a lot of them weren't amazing, I'm happy to be passing them along. You know, I like to get rid of stuff that I don't love, so I have no problems with that. In usual fashion, I have separated these books into categories. It's just easier for my brain to organize than going from least favorite to most favorite. So let's start with nonfiction. Let's just get that one out of the way. I read 3 books by the same author. First one I picked up by this author is How to Be a Good Creature by Cy Montgomery. I saw Kaylin Abridged post this in like her spring book haul or something, and I thought this cover was adorable. This book has some adorable illustrations by Rebecca Green, and in general the way this book was put together was very well done. I listened to this primarily though as an audiobook, and it was narrated by Cy Montgomery herself. Basically what I learned is I had heard about Cy Montgomery because she wrote the more well-known book Soul of an Octopus. I did read this one this month as well, but this author is a scientist and naturalist. She loves animals, and she tells not totally the story of her life because this is a very short book, but she tells the story of 13 animals that touched her life and that were very important to her, most of them being the pets that she owned, her dogs and a pig, and then some special animals that she met on her expeditions and adventures that were also meaningful. Very sweet, very wholesome. If you love like animal stories and animal memoirs, I feel like you would like this one. In a very similar vein, The Soul of an Octopus is all about her specific encounter with an octopus and discovering that creature. She tells the stories of visiting the Boston Aquarium and her developing a relationship with an octopus that was in captivity there, as well as the people that worked at the aquarium. And then she decided to take on scuba diving to be able to interact with octopuses in their natural habitat in the ocean. In general, her books and her stories are for people that love to watch those nature documentaries, all the BBC ones. If you like David Attenborough, if you're a fan of Jane Goodall, if you love a good animal memoir and story, then I would recommend this author. The third book of hers that I also listened to is The Hummingbird's Gift. This is a very short 2-hour audiobook all about the hummingbird. Now, she worked with a woman who runs a wildlife rehab center for hummingbirds and basically saves hummingbirds. So she talked about these 2 hummingbirds in particular that were saved and how they were rehabbed. And if anything, this book just made me really appreciate the little hummingbirds that I see in my yard. I do have a hummingbird feeder and I absolutely loved watching the hummingbirds, but unfortunately we just have like too many cats outside in this area that I think they have killed all the hummingbirds, because I haven't seen any come to the feeder in a very long time, and it makes me very sad because we have like a very cat heavy, predator heavy environment and they eat a lot of birds, which is unfortunate. But if you love hummingbirds, this is a book for you. The other nonfiction that's a poetry collection that I actually started in April but finished in May is Ink Knows No Borders, and this is poems of the immigrant and refugee experience, and there's a ton of different authors in here. I don't read poetry too often. I think I've talked about it in previous videos. I just find a lot of them very dense, and I don't seem to understand the meaning behind all of the words put together on a page. But this one had a lot more relatability and made me think about some things. And in general, I enjoyed my experience diving into this poetry collection. It still wasn't a favorite and totally profound because I think it being a collection of various voices, there were several poems that were beautiful and impactful. And then there was also a lot that were random and I didn't get at the same time. I still came to that block of not understanding what the author was trying to say with her words. It just feels sometimes too complex, maybe slightly pretentious with like, I don't get what you're trying to evoke here. But in general, a very positive experience with this poetry collection, and did make me think about some things. There were some great gems in here. Next, let me talk about 2 classics that I read this month. The one that I finished is Heidi. This was a buddy read with the lovely Mitzi from Mitzi Reads and Writes. This was a very sweet children's classic, I think also on par with those that love The Secret Garden. It was a little bit basic. I think I landed on like 3.5 stars for this one. Easily the most compelling character in this book was the grandfather. He had the most transformation and character arc. Heidi was way too perfect of a character. She was just like this very mature and perfect child at the age of 5 and never changed, and it was very unrealistic. And I think if I read this as a child, it would have been a lot more impactful, and it has some very sweet takeaways and kind of lessons. Quite a few faith elements in this book about trusting God, seeing the best in others, having faith. Also some very lovely nature writing. I think someone commented in a video where I mentioned this book that you will be craving milk, and that is so true. There's a lot of depiction of like eating fresh milk and bread and cheese in the mountains, and I like barely drink milk, but this book really did make me want to drink like a full glass of cold milk. So yeah, very sweet, glad I read it, but wasn't like the best book ever. The next classic I read, I'm proud of myself, but I'm also so like, who am I? And that is Dune by Frank Herbert. I read this very dense, chunky classic science fiction that's like very political and military and complicated, and it was an interesting experience. It was very conflicting, oftentimes confusing. Half the time I didn't really understand what was happening, but I was also there for it. Like, I never had the urge to stop reading. I was still interested, even though half the time I was like, what is going on? Like, who are you? What's happening? And there were definitely some weird moments in this book. I completely understand the spectrum of people loving it, like think it's fantastic and like want to dive into the rest of the book series. And I also understand the people that give this 1 and 2 stars and say it's the worst. Like, I get it, because I had all of those feelings on the spectrum when reading this book. I still don't know if I'm going to continue the series. I'm leaning more towards probably not, because when it kind of all ended, I was let down and I ended up giving this 3 stars because it was so conflicting. Like, it was good and bad at moments at the same time, and I will happily watch the movies as they come out probably years down the line, but I don't really think I need to continue on with this like 6-book series, I believe. So what is it about? I don't even know if I could tell you. It's set in space, and it follows the main boy who is basically like the chosen one, the one that is gonna save the sand people on this planet. And then there are people on different planets that don't like each other, that want to kill each other, and behind it all there's like a religious sect of people that are trying to change the order of the world. A fun fact I learned is that the author was a journalist and visited the sand dunes in Florence, Oregon, and that was what inspired him to kind of create this world. A bunch of other things inspired him too, but specifically the sand dunes of Oregon kind of brought to life in his mind's eye the world of Dune. So that was kind of a fun fact. But the author really, like, to have the kind of brain to write this story is wild. Like, there are so many made up things in here. Pretty much every other word and every other sentence is just made up words. It's a made up world with religion and characters and clothing and food and just everything in between. There are like 5 appendixes to this book that talk about the religious system, the planets, and a huge glossary of all of the vocabulary that is made up for the story. So would I ever recommend this to people? No, I would not. This is something that if you feel compelled to read, go for it, but like prepare yourself for a very kind of tedious read. It was difficult. You have to pay attention, otherwise you're gonna miss everything that's going on. So yeah, it was interesting. A very weird experience, and I have no regrets, but I also am not like in love. Somewhere in between. Next up, I'm going to talk about 4 Treasures of the Sky. This is the only book I think that I read off of my May TBR, and I listened to this as an audiobook thanks to Libro FM. And this is a historical fiction set in the late 1800s about a young Chinese girl who is kidnapped from China, sold into prostitution in San Francisco. She later escapes and disguises herself as a boy and then works in Idaho and makes some friends there. This is a very sad book. There was really no hope, and there were no happy endings or really resolutions. It was all just kind of sitting in the pain and grief of this woman's experience. She experiences quite a bit of sexual trauma as well as racism from people that were very anti-Chinese during this time period. I gave this book 3 stars because I found myself not fully loving the character, and I don't know if that's too harsh of a critique, but for some reason I wasn't drawn into the story as much as I would have liked. I didn't find myself just being in there with her. I felt like I kind of just watched it happen, and I don't need a happy ending, but I feel like I do need a little bit of hope throughout, and this book was just depressing through and through, and at the end of the day I just didn't really feel connected to any of the characters. So that's just my own takeaway from that reading experience. Next up, let's talk about some contemporary romance. Guys, I guess I like them because I read 3 more. In total, I read 4. My very first contemporary romance ever was Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and I talked about that in my part 1 wrap up for May, and I just decided to keep going with Emily Henry because the next one I read was People We Meet on Vacation. This book I found in a little free library, and I thought I'm just gonna read all of her books. So I read this one, and then I also read Beach Read. People We Meet on Vacation was definitely my least favorite out of the bunch. This one, I just really didn't like this whole like, we're friends but we secretly love each other but we can't tell each other anything, and it's complicated, and so we're gonna just be in love with each other but not do anything about it and make life complicated. I really don't like miscommunication as a trope. So out of the 3, definitely the least favorite. And then it'd be Book Lovers, and then finally Beach Read. I gave this one 4 stars. The most enjoyable contemporary romance out of the bunch that I've read so far. This one was a bit more fun, and I liked the banter of the characters, and I liked the overall character arcs of both characters. I felt like I got enough of the male and the female, not just the female and the guy is like just a guy who doesn't really have anything to his personality. Beach Read out of the 3 is my favorite, and I'll probably pick up more Emily Henry in the future because I'm on the bandwagon. I'm not like in love and that's the only thing I'm gonna read now, but I am a lot more open to it now than I ever was before. So we'll see what's gonna happen. I did pick up another contemporary romance because it was on my shelf and I guess I was in the mood, and that is Things You Save in a Fire by Catherine Center. And this one is all about a woman who is a firefighter, and she joins a new fire brigade team in Boston, ends up falling in love with the rookie firefighter that's there as well. They're both kind of newbies to the team and get hazed together and put into situations together and end up falling in love, and it was also very sweet. I think what I didn't love about it was like the villain just seemed very unrealistic and silly and not like firefighter behavior. Very dramatized for really no reason at all. So that was kind of what brought it down. So those are the contemporary romances that I read. If you have any recommendations for me, let me know, because I'm now like putting my feelers out there to explore this genre a little bit. But if you are a contemporary romance reader, what are your like top 3 that you love that you would recommend that aren't super steamy but aren't like so ridiculous and unrealistic and dumb characters? Something in between, you know? Moving on to the one thriller that I picked up, A Noise Downstairs by Linwood Barclay. I picked this up for Buzzwordathon because I needed a direction in a title, and this was a very disappointing thriller for me. I ended up giving it 2 stars. I just really did not care for this mystery and the characters in here. This book is about a man who was driving along and saw that one of his colleagues was trying to bury some dead bodies, ends up getting hit in the head. Police came to the situation and saved his life, but he's seeing a therapist to kind of work through this trauma as well as the headaches that he gets from his concussion from getting hit in the head. His colleague's in prison, and he ends up hearing noises, and his wife then hears noises, and a lot of stuff is like happening, and he's sort of losing his mind and doesn't really understand what's going on. So I guess this is a bit of a psychological thriller. This is also a bit of like a fake paranormal where it feels ghostly but there's no actual ghost, because then at the end you figure out what's going on. I don't know, it was just lame. I didn't really like anything about it. All right, we're near the end. The last 2 books are both contemporaries that I picked up. Another one that I didn't really love, ended up giving it 2 stars as well, is Inside the O'Briens by Lisa Genova. I read Still Alice in the first part of the month and loved it, so just was in the mood to pick up more of her books. This is another one of hers that I owned. This book is about a Boston police officer who gets diagnosed with Huntington's disease, which is a lethal genetic neurodisease, and then it impacts his life and his family's life. There were definitely some similarities to this book with Still Alice, where it impacts the whole family and you get to kind of sit with the family after getting this diagnosis. However, this book also shifted perspectives. Half of the book was from his daughter's perspective, and I didn't really care to sit in that because it's this young woman who doesn't really want to stay in Boston, is trying to figure out her life, and she may or may not have this disease, and so she's just kind of figuring that out and what that means and is processing all that. And I don't really necessarily care to sit with a character who's literally just processing and nothing's really happening. Not a lot of action, not a lot of plot happen in this book. You just get the diagnosis and then you're just kind of sitting in like, I may or may not have it and this sucks, and what does that mean for my life? And I get that that's a very real experience that people have when they get diagnosed with terminal illnesses. But if I'm going to compare the 2 books, because I just read them too maybe close together. Still Alice was a lot better for me than this one. And finally, to end it on a positive note, and the only book that I gave 5 stars to easily was the Liane Moriarty book, and that was What Alice Forgot. I read Big Little Lies several years ago and loved my experience with that, and I'm so happy to report that another Liane Moriarty just worked for me in that same way. Absolutely loved this book, and it got me more excited to read more of hers, although I know some of her books are hits or misses for people too, so we'll see. But this one is all about a woman who is in actuality 39 years old and on the brink of divorce, but she goes to the gym and falls down, hits her head, and then wakes up with amnesia and doesn't remember the last 10 years. And she thinks that she's 29, happily married, and newly pregnant, expecting her first child. So this story is her uncovering what happened in the last 10 years. And I think it spans about a week. It raises a lot of questions about making certain life decisions. The main character questions what happened to her because she was nice and was really close to her family, but then 10 years later she's barely talking to her sister. She and her husband hate each other, and she's kind of known to like rub people the wrong way and be very mean and uppity, and she's trying to figure out what happened in her life to make her that way. I just thoroughly loved my experience with this one, the questions it unpacked, and just being with this character. I guess a slight warning, it is set in Australia, and another stereotype I guess about Australians is that they swear a lot, and so this book has a lot of that, but it didn't feel unnecessary. It just felt natural to the way that this character would talk and experience life. And then another trigger warning for infertility, because the main character's sister is struggling with that, and so there's quite a bit of that to unpack in the story as well. So yeah, this one was a win for me, and I'm excited to pick up more Moriarty. But anyways, thank you all for watching the rest of my May wrap up, and in general it was a good mood reading month. I honestly have no idea what the next few months are going to look like and when I'm going to be in the mood to read. We'll see, because I feel like I'm sort of maybe slightly changing as a reader. I don't know, figuring stuff out, but I'm excited for the summer months ahead and all the fun reading left to do. So you will see me in more videos soon. Bye.